Star Wars 7x7, episode 1962. Well, I did it. TED Talk is done, and I learned some very valuable lessons about the process, which I'd love to share with you, and also tell you when you will get to be able to see this talk. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. So following up on yesterday's episode where I talked about the fact that I was going to do a TED Talk at least at the time of recording, well, now I'm recording this after the day is done and the TED Talk has been delivered. And thankfully it seemed to go over well, so that's awesome news. And so I thought I would share with you a few things that I've learned throughout the process of doing this. And yes, some of this stuff is independent of Star Wars, but some of it relates to Star Wars very much so. And so I hope you will indulge me in this particular episode. And then later on we'll talk about when you'll actually get to see the talk for yourself. First of all, I'll talk about the importance of framing the question. So when I did this whole application business, so the TED Talk thing is that you're nominated by someone, but you have to apply. You send in an application, and then your application is reviewed along with everybody else's by the committee, and then you are approved or not approved. Well, when I was initially filling out the application, what Lonnie, my wife and business partner, had asked me was, what is Star Wars all about? And my answer was hope and family. And so we boiled that down to hope. And one of the things that they recommend, or is recommended in this book, How to Deliver a TED Talk by Jeremy Donovan, is that to come up with your big idea, the idea worth spreading, which is what TED is all about. One of the good ways to do that is to start with a question, and your big idea is the answer to the question. So for me, the way I had framed it in my application was, how do we deal with cycles of negativity repeating themselves in our personal, professional, and global lives? And the answer, as I proposed it at the time, this is back in, I'll say April of this year, was my idea worth spreading is to treat the notion of hope as an active, not passive means for effecting change, using the lessons of Star Wars as a guide. So that is where things began. And I will say that probably the second thing I would say I've learned is to trust the process, although the process is going to look different for different people. So I got to meet, of course, all of the other speakers, and what I learned from the process is that they actually ask you the script, the whole thing. Like, you don't get to do this by the seat of your pants. You have to script out your talk word for word. And so they give you a lot of time to do this. And because of the fact that I do what I do for a living, I apparently had a bit of a leash. And it might have been longer than other folks's. So that was a relief, but multiple drafts were definitely required for the process to really hone in not just on the idea of the talk, but how it was going to be delivered. And it was hard. I mean, I did resist the process to some degree, and in some cases went kicking and screaming into it, in all honesty. But ultimately, thankfully, working with a gal named Jessica Terzakis, who was my speaker coach, things ultimately turned out very well, which I'm supremely grateful for. The third thing is the timing situation. So TED Talks are supposed to be 18 minutes or less, though we were told that if we went over, that there was no hook that they were going to extend out from stage left to yank us off the stage, which is nice. But what I was told is that from time to time, talks at TEDx events are brought over to the main TED.com website, which gives them tremendously greater visibility, and that for every 30 seconds beyond 18 minutes that you go, that exponentially decreases the likelihood that the main TED organization could bring your talk over to that website. So it was vitally important for me to be under 18 minutes because I definitely want the opportunity for the talk to go over if it's deemed worth it. So yeah, I had one rehearsal where the talk that I had scripted went 20 minutes, and I had another 2 in a row where it was 15 minutes on the dot, and thought that everything was going to be, just fine. And when I actually got out on the stage and delivered the talk, they have a timer in front of you and also slides if you want them to be able to reference things, which I did not do actually. I did it completely off memory. But there was a timer showing me how far in I was, and right around the 15-minute mark, I realized that I was not done and not about to be done. And so I got a little nervous on stage, and I asked around, and it didn't seem like anybody picked up on that, but I definitely felt myself picking up the pace and eyeing the clock and making sure that I was able to get in under the window. And I think it ultimately ended up at 17 minutes and 45 seconds. So thankfully, something about doing a podcast for 7 to 10 minutes a day may have contributed to being able to stay underneath that limit. And related to that, I think one of the fourth things was just the value of rehearsal, but not just rehearsing the talk that I had written for public consumption, but also to be able to be at the event. So we were at the place, the Stockbridge Theater, the day before to not just rehearse, but also just to see the building, look at the backstage areas, know where we were supposed to be, when we were supposed to be, actually be out on the stage to be able to work with the confidence monitor, the thing that's supposed to show the slides for the people that were using them, and then to be on the rug. So I guess I won't hedge it and say most. I'll say most of the time when I've done presentations, I have free reign to roam wherever I want to, basically. And I think every time I've seen an official TED Talk, that's been the case too. But in this particular case, they had a rug that was roughly 6 feet in diameter, and you were required to stay on the rug. There were 3 cameras pointed at you from different angles, and they were not being moved. They were stationary cameras, and so I had to stay on the rug. That was a difficult proposition, and I gotta tell you, I think that was probably one of the reasons I was most grateful for the rehearsal time on the day before the event, was to be able to get used to the notion of having to stay in this 6-foot radius situation, or 6-foot diameter situation. I was told out of the 10 speakers that were doing their rehearsals that day, was it 9, 10, that I was the one who tested the limits of the rug more than most people, and I'm not altogether surprised by that. And a fifth thing, and this is also related to the scripting, which was it was an unusual process because I'm just not used to presenting from a straight script, but the idea of working in references to the various Star Wars movies was something that was a very joyful thing, but also something that couldn't be the goal of what I was doing. And there is actually a point where I think I've said already that I referenced 8 of the 10 movies that are currently out in the talk. There was a place I realized after the fact where I could have worked in something that would have given a wink and a nod to at least a 9th one, but unfortunately didn't figure it out until afterwards. But I did work in a reference to the first expanded universe novel, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, or at least something that sort of evoked the notion of Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and I had a couple people come up to me after the talk and go, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, I see what you did there, which was very gratifying and also opened up a couple of conversations that were very neat to have too. And I guess the 6th thing related to that is just the joy of Star Wars in general and in unexpected places. So there is a portion of the talk where I say that you could consider storytelling to be the Millennium Falcon of hope. And they tell you in the rehearsals that there may be places in your talk where there's laughter or, other audible expressions, and to be ready to pause so that way you don't roll over in your speech, roll over those laugh lines, like give people a moment. I was not expecting that to be a laugh line or a reaction line of any kind, but there was definitely an audible "ha" in the auditorium when I delivered that line. I was not expecting it, but it was a beautiful thing to have kind of wash over me during the talk. It was a really neat thing to experience, that joy of Star Wars in the audience, and palpable, and getting the references and laughing at the references when they were appearing in the talk itself. So but that one was one I wasn't even expecting to come up. And I think the seventh thing overall out of the stuff that I learned by doing this is just how the pervasiveness of Star Wars is, even among people who haven't seen it. So I mention in the talk the story that Chris Taylor tells in How Star Wars Conquered the Universe about them partnering with LucasFilmandChange.org to find people who have never seen Star Wars and invite them to a screening, that they could only find 30 people who hadn't seen it. And so I had a number of people come up to me and say, I'm 31 and I'm 32, or, oh, I must have been one of those 30 or something like that. But still tell me that they enjoyed the talk and that they, understood what I was saying, and that they were still able to even relate to some of the things that I was talking about that were Star Wars specific in the talk, because of the fact that it is so culturally pervasive. And that was really amazing and gratifying too. So ultimately, it was a wonderful experience, and I could continue talking about it, but I'm going to spare you at least until the talk actually comes out, when we'll probably talk about it a little bit more. But when's it coming out? Well, I'll share that with you in just a moment. Stay tuned. Hey Rebel Rouser, I've made some changes to the asteroid belt level at patreon.com/SW7X7, and they are all with sponsors in mind. So if you want to get the word out about your business, your product, your service to a dedicated Star Wars audience, then please check out patreon.com/SW7X7 and look for the asteroid belt level for details. Again, that's patreon.com/SW7X7. Welcome back. So, from what I've been told, there are 3 different production companies that are being tapped to look at the footage from this TEDx event and create the final videos for the website and to go onto YouTube and to whatnot. They have 3 different camera angles, and then for the people who are using slides for their presentations, that essentially is a 4th camera angle, and so they're editing 3 or 4 different camera angles, and therefore anywhere from an hour of footage to up to, there were a couple of people who went a little bit long, to, as much as 80 or 90 minutes of footage, editing it down into a coherent 15, 20-minute video or something like that. So I've been told not to expect it until February, although it could be earlier. So we'll see. But when it comes out, I will talk to you about the release of the video, and we'll talk about some of the things that I say in the video, because it's a little deeper and more personal than I expected it to be. And, it is what it is. So we'll talk about it when it comes out. But for now, that's going to do it for this episode of the show and talking about TED, at least for a little while. But thank you so much for joining me for it. Thank you again for supporting me and getting me to the point where I could be nominated and accepted to deliver a TED Talk. It's a beautiful honor. I'm very grateful to you for that too. And may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
This podcast is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox. It is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other related Star Wars items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2019 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.